Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? But you would give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times?
Okay, good evening, everybody. It is time for some more Revan, which we've been kind of slacking on a bit. We haven't been really keeping up with it. But that's all right. We'll get through it and move on to the next thing. All right, so tonight, chapters 12 and 13, and if I'm feeling up to it, maybe 14. So here we go, chapter 12. So if you remember, actually pausing, because last time, it's been a while. It's been like a week since I read. So last time, Revan was supposed to go kill the other Sith Council member, whose name escapes me at the moment, and it turned out that he basically wanted to hire Revan instead, and Revan did not agree. I think he killed the guy, if I remember right. So I'm going back just to double check. Not Revan, Scourge. Scourge killed. It was. I kept saying Revan. I'm sorry. That's the name of the book. I believe he decided to kill the guy, if I remember right. I hope I'm remembering right. Even though the guy was trying to bribe him. Anyway, We'll move on and we'll find out, I guess, won't we? Um, that's why it sucks to go a week without reading. All right, Chapter 12. I wasn't told to expect you back yet, Lord Scourge, the guard at the gate said. Maybe Darth Nyrus didn't think you needed to know my schedule, Scourge replied, his tone dripping with acid. The guard nodded and buzzed Scourge in. Scourge moved quickly down the stronghold's halls, hoping his rebuke had shocked the guard into not reporting his arrival. The truth was, Nyrus didn't know he was back yet. He had been expected to contact her immediately after the mission to kill Darth Zedrix was over, but he'd stayed silent, hastening his return journey to Droman Kaas so he could question Seshel before anyone else knew he had touched down on the planet. He'd arrived late at night, and if he was lucky, he'd catch Seshel asleep in his room. In the servants' wing, he paused at the large wooden door and tested the handle, expecting it to be locked. To his surprise, it turned silently in his hand. Was Seshel expecting someone, or was he merely so confident in his position as Nyrus's favorite that he believed himself safe? Scourge entered the room, silently locking the door behind him, then crept through the darkness to the bed where Seshel lay sleeping beneath the covers. Reaching out, he placed his gloved hand firmly over Seshel's mouth. Seshel woke with a start, thrashing and loosing muffled cries into Scourge's palm. The Sith Lord pressed down harder and leaned in close. "Cry out for help, and you're dead," he whispered in Seshel's ear. "Do you understand?" Feeling the advisor nod, Scourge slowly drew his hand away. "Lord Scourge," Seshel asked softly, "is that you? It's hard to see in the dark." "No light," Scourge warned, knowing someone might see the glow from beneath the door and decide to investigate. "I trust your mission went well?" Seshel said. Scourge couldn't see the expression on the advisor's face, but he detected the faintest tremor in his voice. "You're going to answer my questions," Scourge said. "Of course, my lord," Seshel replied, reverting to the fawning, ingratiating tone he'd adopted at their first meeting. "Meekness will not save you tonight," Scourge said. "The truth is your only hope of surviving this interrogation." He pulled a short, sharp blade from his belt and pressed it against Seshel's cheek. "My first question is a simple one. Has Nyrus been using me?" "My lord, why would you think—" Scourge jammed his hand over Seshel's mouth, cutting off his words. Then he drew the edge of his blade slowly along the base of one of the fleshy tendrils dangling from Seshel's cheek. The smaller man screamed in agony, but his cries were swallowed up in Scourge's glove. Scourge kept a steady pressure on the blade so that the fine edge sliced cleanly through the tendril, severing it. Blood began to weep from the wound. Scourge waited until Seshel's spasms had stopped before he pulled his hand away. To his credit, Seshel was smart enough to limit further reaction to a soft whimper. "When I ask a question, I want a direct and immediate answer," Scourge said, "so I will ask again. Is Nyrus using me?" "Of course she is," Seshel mumbled. "She uses everybody." "Was Darth Zedrix really working with the human separatists?" "Yes." Scourge analyzed the response, focusing on the tone, pitch, and inflection. Seshel was speaking the truth. "Did Zedrix actually try to kill Nyrus?" When Seshel hesitated, Scourge responded by slamming his hand over his mouth again. Ignoring the muffled pleas, he lowered the blade to the advisor's face and severed another tendril. "Next time I take an eye," he said, once Seshel had recovered from the pain. "Remember, direct and immediate answers." Lying took thought and effort. It took time. Forcing a subject to answer quickly was a simple but effective tool. He removed his hand again, ready to slash Seshel's throat if he cried out for help. Again the advisor had the survival instinct to hold his tongue. Again, did Zedrix actually try to kill Nyrus? No. The answer was spoken sullenly and resentfully, but Scourge could sense the truth behind the attitude. Who hired the assassins? Nyrus did. She wanted to draw suspicion away from herself. Suspicion? Suspicion of what? "Ask her yourself," Seshel spat. Scourge sighed and clamped his hand over Seshel's mouth yet again. But before he could bring the blade to bear, the door swung open with such force it nearly broke free from its hinges. Darth Nyrus stood on the other side, framed by the light of the hallway's glow lamps. "I will answer all your questions," she said calmly, "but if you harm Cecil again, I will end you." Scourge tossed the knife aside and slowly stood up from the bed. His heart was pounding, and he had to fight against the urge to go for his lightsaber. He'd known there were risks in coming after Cecil. Now all he could do was hope his actions hadn't cost him his life. "I assume this conversation will be in private?" he asked. She nodded and turned away. Scourge didn't even look back at Cecil as he followed Nyrus out into the hallway. Darth Nyrus was silent until he reached her private chamber. Scourge was surprised to find that her Twi'lek slave was not present. It seemed that whatever was about to be said could not be trusted even to the Twi'lek's faithful ears. "Are you loyal to the Empire?" Nyrus asked him. "I thought I would get to ask the question," Scourge replied. "Remember your place," she warned. "Listen to what I have to say. When I am finished, you will have your chance to speak." "I am loyal to the Emperor," Scourge declared. "Loyal to the Emperor or to the Empire?" she pressed. "They are two different things." "What do you mean?" "The Emperor is mad. Unchecked, he will destroy us all." "For 1,000 years the Empire has thrived under his rule," Scourge countered. Her words were treason, but there was little he could do about it. If he tried to strike her down, he was fairly sure he would not be able to stand against her. Unlike Darth Zedrix, she was a Sith Council member in the prime of her powers. Now that she had told him her true feelings, she couldn't let him leave her room alive. Not if she felt he would report her to the Emperor. His only option, his only hope for survival, was to play along. "The Emperor has expanded our borders," Nyrus admitted. "He has made us stronger, but he is only doing this for one purpose. He is planning an attack on the Republic. He intends to start another war with the Jedi." "No," Scourge said, shaking his head. "Impossible." The Great Hyperspace War had been one of the darkest times in the history of the Sith. Under the leadership of Naga Sato, they had invaded the newly discovered Republic, seeking to conquer it as they had conquered every other civilization they had encountered. But despite their early victories, they had quickly lost ground. The Republic hadn't just defeated the Sith fleets, they had annihilated them. And when the Jedi had pursued the fleeing survivors across the galaxy, nearly hunting the Sith to extinction. The decisive action of the Emperor had saved them. He had led the remaining Sith into the unexplored regions of the galaxy, a decades-long flight that ended only when they rediscovered and reclaimed Dromund Kaas, their long-lost ancestral home. Unfortunately, the Republic and the Jedi had never found them. Oh, fortunately. Did I say unfortunately? Fortunately, the Republic and the Jedi had never found them here. A small stroke of luck that had allowed the Empire to survive. Over the next centuries, the Sith slowly rebuilt what they had lost. They began to expand their empire again. They conquered newly discovered worlds and sectors on the far fringes of the galaxy, far beyond the borders of Republic-explored space, safely hidden from the ever-vigilant Jedi Order. Every Sith knew the story. It was taught to them at an early age, and while the official stance was that the Empire was slowly gathering its strength to one day strike back at their enemies, the truth was far different. Scourge and Nyrus both understood the folly of that path. They understood that the Empire could survive only as long as the Jedi remained unaware that the Sith still lived. If the Emperor was really planning to attack the Republic again, he would be repeating the mistakes of Naga Sato. Sorry, excuse me. He would be repeating, where is it? He would start a war they couldn't possibly win, and this time the Jedi would not stop until they had wiped the Sith out completely. "You're lying," Scourge insisted. "Attacking the Republic makes no sense. The Emperor is not a fool." "No," Nyrus admitted. "He is no fool. He is arrogant. He is powerful. And he is mad." She looked directly at Scourge. "Some of us on the Dark Council learned of his plan. To save the Empire, to save our entire species, we formed an alliance, vowing to work together to bring the Emperor down." Was Darth Zedrix part of this alliance? He was. Yet you betrayed him? He became a necessary sacrifice for the cause. If he was your ally, why did he have to die? If the Emperor suspected the members of the Dark Council of allying against him, he would kill us all. We had to take steps to protect ourselves, to throw off suspicion. We had to distance ourselves from the separatists who openly opposed the Emperor. That's why you staged the fake assassinations against yourself, Scourge said. If the separatists were targeting you, the Emperor would be less likely to suspect you were working with them. Nyrus nodded. The plan was to have my own people investigate the attempts on my life and place the blame accordingly. And then the Emperor sent you, and the plan had to change. Your arrival meant the Emperor suspected this was bigger than a simple separatist uprising. It wouldn't be enough to implicate a radical fringe group of terrorists. So you framed Zedrix? You can't frame someone who is guilty, Nyrus corrected. I just exposed him. Zedrix really was working with the separatists. Every piece of evidence you uncovered on your missions was real. It had to be. I could not afford to be caught in a lie if you or the Emperor looked deeper into the matter. Allowing Zedrix to take the blame will confirm the Emperor's suspicion that the separatists were working with someone on the Dark Council. His death will keep my involvement and that of my co-conspirators secret. And you get to eliminate a longtime rival, Scourge added. A fortuitous bonus, Nyrus agreed, her face breaking into one of her hideous grins. Zedrix will not be missed, she added. He was a weak link in our chain. He was human, and his power was fading. If one of us had to be sacrificed, he was the most logical choice. Why tell all this to me? Scourge asked. You already suspected something was wrong, Nyrus told him. Why else would you have tried to interrogate Seshel? If I simply kill you, though, I might raise the Emperor's suspicions even further. He sent you to investigate the assassinations. It would be better if you were the one to tell him Darth Zedrix was responsible. She paused for a long moment before continuing. During your service, you have proven your worth to me. You are strong in the Force, intelligent, perceptive. You have incredible potential. My hope is that by revealing the truth, I can convince you to join our cause. I would hate to discard such a valuable tool without good reason. Scourge narrowed his eyes. This was too easy. Even if he swore allegiance to Nyrus, she couldn't just let him walk out of the room. The risk that he might report her to the Emperor was too great. She had to have some other way to protect herself, some angle he hadn't considered. He realized he was in over his depth. Ever since he had come to work for Nyrus, she had been playing him. She'd twisted and manipulated him for her own purposes, and he had danced for her like a puppet on a string. What's the catch? He finally asked. How do you know I won't betray your confidence? Very good, she said, smiling fiendishly in approval. I would have been disappointed if you had simply accepted my offer. Short of killing you, there is no way I can completely eliminate the risk that you will try to expose me. But what proof do you have? Accuse me, and I will simply claim that you are the real traitor, trying to frame me after you killed Darth Zedrix. Remember, whatever actual evidence exists will implicate you, not me. He died by your blade. Are you certain you left no evidence behind that could implicate you in his murder? No drops of blood, no flecks of skin, no witnesses who can place you at the spaceport on Bastarda the day Zedrix died? Scourge nodded in appreciation. He couldn't help but admire how thoroughly Nyrus had entangled him in her web. Let me guess. The files Seshel recovered from the UDM manufacturing plant and the Separatist base will implicate me as well. Seshel is very good at what he does. Even the experts can't tell when he's doctored a data file, she assured him. Even with all the evidence pointing in your direction, it's possible the Emperor would still believe you over a member of the Dark Council, but honestly, he would probably kill us both just to be safe. That way, the traitor is dead no matter which one of us is guilty, and I don't think you're the type to martyr yourself out of loyalty to the Emperor. So where do we go from here? Scourge asked. Now I must persuade you to truly believe in our cause, Nyrus said. It's not enough to secure your silence through threats and blackmail. When we finally move against the Emperor, I want you on our side. And how do you intend to convince me? Have you ever heard tales of the Emperor's childhood? Scourge shook his head. I don't even know what planet he's from. Few people do. He's hidden his past because if the truth came to light, none would follow him. Scourge was interested despite himself. He was born almost 1,000 years ago, she went on, in the decades before the Great Hyperspace War with the Republic. He spent his childhood on Nathema, a lush and vibrant agricultural world on the far fringes of the Empire. Nathema? I've never heard of it. Once it went by another name, but that name has long been forgotten. Just like the planet itself, the Emperor erased Nathema from the history books and the astrogation charts to hide all evidence of his crimes. Crimes? Through the lost rituals of the ancients, he used the dark side to conquer death and make himself immortal, but his immortality came with a cost. Telling you what happened is not enough. You must see for yourself. Only then will you understand the price the Emperor was willing to pay. Only then will you understand why he must be stopped. And how am I to find this lost world? I will take you there, Nyrus said. Then you can witness the horror with your own eyes. How do I know this isn't a trap? Scourge demanded. Another elaborate trick to manipulate me into doing your bidding. You don't, Nyrus admitted. But what other choice do you have? She had a point. When do we leave? He asked. Patience, Lord Scourge, Nyrus said. It will take several days before we're ready to leave. The journey is long, and we must be certain the Emperor never finds out. Traveling to Nathema is punishable by death. Will Cecil be joining us? No, this is for your eyes alone. Scourge nodded silently, wondering if the advisor would try to seek revenge for the brutal interrogation. You are part of the inner circle now, Nyrus assured him. Cecil will not dare to harm you. See to your injuries, she instructed, noting the burns left behind by Darth Zedrix's lightning attack. Then return to your room and get some rest. As he turned to go, she gave him another of her unsettling smiles. You might want to sleep with one eye open, though, just in case. And that's the end of chapter 12. So we're going into 13. Clan Ordo's victory celebrations continued late into the night. 6 members of the clan, 4 men and 2 women, had died in the battle, a quarter of the casualties they had inflicted on Clan Gendry. Vila had ordered all 30 bodies to be gathered together into a massive funeral pyre. Revan understood this mixing of friend and foe. They were all Mandalorians who had died in battle. By custom, they were all due a warrior's funeral, regardless of which clan they had been fighting for. The pyre burned for hours, the flames lighting the night and warming the camp as the brothers and sisters of the fallen recounted tales of their bravery. They honored their memories through song and feast, simultaneously grieving their deaths and celebrating the resounding Ordo victory. The ale flowed freely, but Revan had limited himself to a single mug. Because he had fought with Clan Ordo, he was entitled to join the revelry, but though he knew their customs, he wasn't Mandalorian. It was difficult for him to rejoice in the loss of comrades, no matter how honorable their deaths may have been. Revan was also wary of what Vila might do now that she knew he was a Jedi. Hopefully, she just thought he was an anonymous rogue master. If she knew who he really was, there could be trouble. Many Mandalorians despised the Jedi, and Revan in particular. Revan had been responsible for countless Mandalorian deaths, and he had stolen and hidden Mandalore's mask, an act some considered a war crime. Considering Vila's fierce pride in her people and her culture, she probably wouldn't simply forgive and forget. Fortunately, it seemed like she wasn't aware of his true identity. Over the course of the evening, Edric and several others came over to speak with him, making a point to include him in the clan festivities. Everyone seemed to know he had drawn the fire of the enemy basilisks, allowing the pilots to reach their mounts. Interestingly, though, none of them knew any of the details of what had occurred out beyond the edges of the main battle. Obviously, Vila had sworn the other pilots to secrecy. He should have taken that as a good sign, but he kept catching glimpses of Vila and the other pilots watching him suspiciously. They might not know he was Revan, but they knew he was a Jedi, and that clearly bothered them. He wasn't sure if Vila had ordered them to stay silent out of respect for what he had done during the battle, or because she thought they still needed him to find Mandalore's mask, or even because of her feelings for Canderous. But whatever the explanation, his secret seemed safe. For now. When he finally climbed into bed late that night, he was surprised to hear Canderous come stumbling into the tent a few minutes later. "I thought you'd be with Vila." "She's not too happy with me right now," Canderous explained. "I'll let her cool down for the night." "Sorry about that." "You did what you had to," his friend answered as he settled into his sleeping bag. "Sooner or later it was going to come out anyway." "How bad is this?" "Vila doesn't like Jedi," Canderous admitted, "but she's hard to read. Hopefully she'll just hold a grudge for a few days." The big man rolled over onto his side. "Either that or she'll try to kill us on tomorrow's climb." Revan couldn't tell if he was joking. The weather in the morning was the same as every other morning on Rekiad, freezing cold with fierce winds and swirling snow that limited visibility. Revan had been hoping for a calm, clear day so that they could use the basilisks to fly them up to the top. But even here at the base, unexpected gusts had enough strength to almost knock him off his feet. Higher up, the wind shear and lack of visibility would make an attempted landing on the summit suicidal, even for the most skilled pilots. Dangerous as it was, climbing to the top was the only real option. "Bad conditions for an ascent," Canderous remarked as they stood at the base of the first spear. "This is as good as it gets," Vila said. "If you're scared, I'll get Edric to take your place and you can watch over the camp." "The old man would probably have a heart attack halfway up," Canderous answered with a grin. "He's only a year older than you," Vila pointed out. "But I'm like a fine wine," he replied. "I get better with age." The playful exchange eased some of Revan's concerns about the mission, though he still wasn't thrilled by the makeup of the climbing team. There were 8 of them in total: Revan, Canderous, Vila, and the 5 other basilisk riders, including Grizzer, the young man who'd given up his mount to Canderous. Vila's picks made a certain amount of sense. Going after Mandalore's mask was a great honor, and the basilisk riders were among the most respected warriors in the clan. The only other person who might have been included was Edric, but he had been chosen to stay behind to lead Clan Ordo in case Vila and the others never came back. Yet Revan couldn't help noticing that all of the climbers chosen knew he was a Jedi, and Edric, Canderous' oldest and most loyal friend, was being left behind. He wished he'd had a chance to talk to Canderous before they had left. Now all he could do was keep his guard up throughout the ascent, just in case. They broke into 2 teams of 4, the members of each team connected by a long length of climbing rope. Canderous, Revan, and 2 of the pilots made up the first group, Vila and the other 3 pilots the second. In addition to their winter clothing and gear, each climber had a 20-kilo pack of supplies and rations strapped across his or her shoulders. The 2 teams began their ascent simultaneously, moving along parallel paths up the sheer vertical surface of the wall of ice that made up the spear's face. Each meter of progress was earned only by hacking into the ice, chipping away with a sharp-ended pick to create a small hold for a hand or foot, then hammering a braced pulley into the wall to secure the climbing rope. The pattern was repeated again and again. Progress was slow and exhausting. A single misstep could send a climber plunging to a quick and gruesome death. Theoretically, the ropes and pulleys connecting each team should allow the other 3 members to bear the weight if one should fall, but none of them was inclined to test the theory. After only 50 meters, the roaring wind was already strong enough to rip away their voices, forcing them to communicate with simple hand gestures. Despite the cold, Revan was sweating heavily beneath his layers of clothing, his body warmed by the steady physical exertion as they battled their way meter by painful meter toward the top. At least he was safe from Vila for the time being. The difficult climb required total focus and concentration from every climber as they worked in concert to reach the peak. Even if the Ordo pilots were plotting against him, they simply wouldn't be able to try anything until he reached the plateau at the top. At the start of the climb, the summit was invisible, lost in the swirl of snow and clouds, but by the 5th hour they had risen above the worst of the storm, giving them their first glimpse of the spear's peak, illuminated by Rekiad's pale orange sun. They were well over halfway to their goal, but exhaustion and fatigue were beginning to impede their progress. As the altitude increased, the air became thinner, leaving all the climbers panting and gasping. The pack strapped to Revan's back seemed to have doubled in weight, and he could feel the straps digging into his shoulders even through his clothes. But there was little to do except ignore the pain and concentrate on the climb. Vila's team was about 50 meters ahead. Suddenly, one of their riders lost his footing and slipped. He dropped 10 meters before the ropes abruptly stopped his fall, leaving him dangling helplessly at the end of the line. The abrupt stop had jerked his backpack partially around, twisting the shoulder straps so that his arms were partially pinned behind his back. Combined with the howling winds buffeting him back and forth, he was unable to reestablish a grip on the mountain. Vila and the others began the slow and careful process of climbing back down to help him. It took about 2 minutes for Revan's team to draw level with Vila and her crew as they backtracked to rescue the wayward climber. Realizing the situation was under control, Revan's team pressed on toward the top. 5 minutes after the fall, Revan glanced back to see that all 4 of Vila's team were once again safely in position. They were not trying to regain the lead, but moved more slowly and cautiously. 2 hours later, Revan's team reached the top. Canderous was first, planting his feet firmly. He reached down to grab Revan's arm and haul him up. Revan did the same for the woman trailing behind him, and she did the same for the man behind her. The top of the first spear was a featureless plateau of slick ice covered by a thin dusting of snow. Looking across the gap between the 2 spears, Revan could see that the other summit was as bare and featureless as this one. "Now what?" Canderous shouted over the roar of the wind. "If this is the right peak, there should be an entrance around here somewhere," Revan yelled back. A gust of wind shoved him sideways, and he almost stumbled. An entrance to what? Revan only shrugged. His vision had shown him that he and Malak had discovered what he and Malak had discovered, and no more memories had bubbled to the surface during the climb. They all set their backpacks on the ground and started a grid pattern search over the plateau's surface. It didn't take them long to find what they were looking for. Near the center of the plateau, under a dusting of snow, was a small durasteel hatch. Revan grabbed the handle and pulled hard, calling on the force to give him strength when he felt his muscles begin to strain. Slowly, reluctantly, the heavy cover swung open to reveal a ladder leading down into darkness. "You stay here and wait for Vila," Canderous ordered the other two Mandalorians. "We'll go down and check it out." He retrieved several glow sticks from his backpack on the ground, along with a blaster pistol. Revan didn't have a weapon in his pack. Everyone on the climb already knew he was a Jedi, and he was confident the lightsaber at his belt would be enough to deal with anything they ran into. Not that he expected any trouble. It was hard to imagine a more remote, isolated, and inhospitable location. It was easy to see why he had decided to hide Mandalore's mask here. But where was here, exactly? Why was there a secret underground chamber built into the spear, and how had he and Malak found it in the first place? Canderous walked over to the hatch and dropped one of the glow sticks into it. It tumbled down, illuminating the length of the shaft as it fell. It stopped some 30 meters below, bouncing, rolling, and then settling on the ground. "After you," Canderous said. As Revan began the long descent, his mind started to spin. Brief flashes of dormant memories exploded into his consciousness, only to vanish before he could fully grasp them. He had an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. He knew with certainty he and Malik had explored the dark chamber beneath the ice just as he and Candaris were exploring it now. The sights and sound of his previous visit blended with his current surroundings, the images overlapping one another, obscuring his vision and making him dizzy. It got so bad that Revan had to close his eyes, clinging to the rungs of the ladder with a tense grip. "You okay?" Candaris asked from a few meters above. His voice echoed loudly off the rough-hewn rock walls. "My past is catching up with me," Revan explained, shaking his head to dispel the vertigo. He waited a few more seconds, and when he opened his eyes again, everything had returned to normal. Taking a deep breath, he continued downward until he reached the bottom. The shaft ended in a tight, twisting tunnel that continued horizontally. Resisting the urge to draw his lightsaber, Revan pulled out another glow stick and started down the passage. Candaris followed close behind. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to walk single file, but the ceiling was high enough that even Candaris didn't have to duck. It didn't take long for Revan to realize that they were walking on a slight decline, going even deeper into the heart of the spear. The air around them grew warmer, causing them to unbutton their jackets and lower their hoods. As they continued on, Revan began to feel the unmistakable presence of the dark side. His hand dropped to the lightsaber at his belt, but he relaxed as he realized that the sensation was too faint to signify an immediate threat. Once the Force had been strong in this place, but over time, many decades or even centuries, it had faded away to little more than a memory. Eventually, the passage brought them into a large circular chamber hewn from the rock. Easily 30 meters across, the chamber was empty save for a large stone crypt in the center. "What is this place?" Candaris whispered. "I think it's the burial chamber of an ancient Sith Lord," Revan answered. "Like the tombs on Korriban. Why would they bury him here in this frozen wasteland?" To his own surprise, Revan knew the answer to that question. He was an exile. He fled here with a handful of his fanatically loyal followers many centuries ago. When he died, they carved out this secret chamber to inter him so his enemies couldn't find and desecrate his remains. "How do you know that?" Revan shrugged. "I just know. Malik and I came here looking for this crypt. Someone must have told us about it." "You mean someone like Mandalore?" Another memory came crashing in on Revan, triggered by the words of his friend. Mandalore the Ultimate lay dying at his feet, coughing on the blood welling up in his lungs. He reached out and peeled off his mask, the most sacred symbol of his people. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he said, his voice soft and low. "They promised me victory. Only now do I see how I was betrayed." Revan tilted his head to the side, puzzled. "What are you talking about?" "They tricked me. We were never meant to win this war. They used me and my people to test the Republic's strength." "Who used you?" "The Sith." The recollection ended abruptly, slipping quickly back into Revan's subconscious. But in bubbling up to the surface, it had released a host of other trapped memories, and they crashed over Revan like a wave, staggering him. "I remember," he muttered, placing his hand on the wall for support. "I remember." "What?" Candaris asked anxiously. "What do you remember?" Kevin didn't... Kevin? Kevin? What the hell? Revan didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the chamber to the sarcophagus in the center. Carved into the granite sides was an interweaving pattern of circles and diagonal lines, most likely a family crest or seal. The tomb's heavy stone lid was smooth and unadorned, but as Revan drew closer he could see marks and scratches along the edges, signs that had been moved several times. Reaching out with the Force, Revan focused on the lid. After a moment it began to move, the edge grating along the lip of the lower half of the sarcophagus as it slowly rose into the air. Careful not to let the heavy lid drop, he moved it off to the side and gently lowered it to the floor. Then he stepped up to the sarcophagus and peered inside. There were no remains to be seen. The enemies of the anonymous Sith Lord in the tomb must have found him after all, stealing his mummified corpse for some dark and twisted purpose. The missing body didn't come as a surprise to Revan, and he suddenly remembered that he and Malak had also found the sarcophagus empty. But they hadn't left it that way. Inside was a datachron, a small cube similar to the holocrons used by the Jedi and Sith to record their teachings for future generations. However, unlike those powerful artifacts, the datachron was not created using the Force. It was simply a repository of information. But Revan barely looked at the datachron. His attention was gripped by the object that lay beside it, Mandalore's mask. And as he reached in and picked up the sacred relic, his mind flashed back to the moment he had left it there. So Mandalore was telling the truth, Malak said. Did you really think his last words would be a lie? Revan asked. Now what? We have our proof, Revan said. The Sith are not extinct. They have to be stopped. What about the Mandalorians? Without the mask, they're nothing, Revan said, placing the mask inside the empty sepulchre. The memory ended, rudely snapping Revan back to the present. He lifted the mask and held it aloft so Canderous could see. The big man walked slowly toward him as if in a daze. He didn't speak, but as he approached, his hands came up almost involuntarily, his fingers reaching out toward the lost symbol of his people. Neither noticed Vila and the others enter the chamber. How dare you defile Mandalore's mask with your filthy Jedi hands, Vila shouted, breaking the spell that had momentarily enthralled the two men. Revan looked up to see her standing at the cavern's entrance, flanked by the other climbers. All 6 Mandalorians were armed with blaster pistols, their muzzles aimed directly at the 2 men standing by the crypt. Vila, Canderous demanded, what do you think you're doing? Put the mask down and step away from the crypt, she commanded, ignoring him. Moving slowly so as not to alarm anyone, Revan placed the mask back in the crypt. Avner fought beside us, Canderous protested. He led us to Mandalore's mask, and you repay him with betrayal? Vila barked out a harsh laugh. Who are you to talk of betrayal? You turned your back on your people, and for what? To throw your lot in with Revan the Butcher? When did you figure it out? Canderous asked, not bothering to deny the truth. Once he revealed himself to be a Jedi, it was obvious, she said with a sneer, especially with that name. Did you really think rearranging Revan into Avner would fool us? This isn't about him, Canderous said. It's about me, isn't it? Vila bit down hard on her lip, but didn't answer. I'm not here to claim the mask for myself, Canderous assured her. You're the rightful leader of Clan Ordo. I'm not here to challenge you. You still don't get it, Vila said, shaking her head. You should be our leader, not me. You were our greatest warrior. You were our champion, our hero. When Mandalore fell, you should have been the one to take his place. She looked at him sadly. Instead, you abandoned us. You abandoned me. I'm sorry, Canderous said softly. When our clan fell apart, I was lost. I had to get away. I didn't know what else to do. You could have stayed and helped piece it back together, Vila insisted, her voice cracking slightly as she lowered the blaster in her hand. Sin Vetin, Canderous said. I can't undo the past, but I'm here now. That's why I didn't tell the others in the camp, she admitted. I didn't want to destroy your reputation by telling them you fell in with Revan. You didn't tell them because you're afraid they would agree with me, Canderous countered. Revan is not our enemy. Not now. Without him, Clan Gendry would have slaughtered us. Without him, we would never have found Mandalore's mask. Revan has proved himself to be our brother, and what are you doing what you are doing brings dishonor on our clan. No, Vila insisted. You're wrong. Clan Ordo might accept a Jedi, but not him. Anyone but him. There's only one way to be sure. We let the whole clan decide. That's not an option, Vila replied, raising her blaster back up. Revan cannot leave this chamber alive. You know Revan's reputation, Canderous warned, and mine. There may be 6 of you, But do you really think you have a chance against us both? We're not here to kill you, Vila told him. Just him. And you expect me to stand by and do nothing? I expect you to join us, Vila shouted. You are Mandalorian. Clan Ordo is your family, not Revan. You have to choose, him or us. It doesn't have to be this way, Canderous said evenly. Lower your weapons, end this madness. We'll take Mandalore's mask back down to the camp together. This is your last chance, Canderous, Vila said. Choose. Her hand was trembling, making it difficult for her to aim, but the other 5 held their blasters ready and true. You can't win this battle, Revan said quietly, speaking more to the others than Vila. We killed dozens of Jedi during the war, Vila answered grimly. I'm no ordinary Jedi. Vila, Canderous pleaded. Please don't do this. Her shoulders slumped and she let out a sigh of resignation. Kill them both. Revan was in motion, his lightsaber flashing to life before the words had finished spilling from her mouth. As Vila and 2 of the others, reacting slightly faster than the rest, fired their blasters, the green blade transformed into a spinning, twirling blur as he used it to deflect their bolts back in the direction of the shooters. One of the deflected bolts struck its mark, taking down the woman on Vila's left. Canderous and Revan dived for cover behind the sarcophagus, just as the other Mandalorians opened fire. Canderous popped up briefly to fire, sending the Mandalorians breaking for cover. There were precious few places to hide in the open chamber. However, and Canderous took 2 of them down before they made it to safety. Vila and the other 2 survivors scrambled back into the passage near the chamber entrance, ducking out of sight around the corner to regroup. A second later, a trio of grenades skittered across the floor, bouncing and rolling to a stop near the base of the sarcophagus. The instant before they detonated, Revan reached out with a force and hurled the heavy stone lid of the sarcophagus toward the grenades. It acted as a shield, absorbing the worst of the blast before exploding into pebbles and dust. The explosion was deafening, though, the concussive force strong enough to knock both Canderous and Revan off their feet. As Revan struggled to stand up, the only sound he could hear was a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Vila and her team seized the advantage and charged into the room, blaster pistols blazing, all 3 aimed at Revan, who just barely rolled clear in time. From the corner of his eye, he saw Canderous lying on his stomach, arms stretched out in front of him to brace his pistol on the floor as he took careful aim. An instant later, Vila went down from a clean kill shot through her heart. Their attention drawn for just an instant by the body of their leader tumbling to the floor, the 2 remaining Mandalorians faltered. Revan used that moment to unleash a sidearm throw of his lightsaber. The blade went spinning out in a wide arcing path that ended both their lives before they could move. Revan adeptly caught his lightsaber by its hilt as it returned to his hand, then slowly stood up straight, his ears still ringing. Nearby, Canderous still lay on the floor, frozen in the same position he had been in moments earlier. Slowly, Revan approached him, trying to see if he was injured. The big man didn't move until Revan reached down and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then Canderous snapped his head around in surprise. He mouthed something, but Revan couldn't hear what he was saying, so he only shrugged in response. Canderous pushed himself up off his stomach and onto his feet, leaving his pistol on the ground. He walked over to where Vila lay face down on the floor and rolled her over. Her eyes were wide, gazing unseeing up at the ceiling. Tenderly, he closed the lids, then folded her hands over her chest. Then he stood up straight and turned away, staring off into an empty corner of the chamber. After a few minutes, Revan went over to stand beside him. "I'm sorry," his voice sounded strange to him. His hearing was still distorted by the grenade, and he wasn't sure if Canderous had heard him. "I'm sorry," he repeated, this time more loudly. Canderous turned his head to look at him. Me too, he answered before turning to stare back at the wall, his words hollow and flat. Me too. And that is the end of chapter 13. So let's see. How many chapters are there, actually? Bear with me a minute. I am not feeling too bad. I might just do another chapter. There are 3 chapters left in part 1 of the book. So if I do one more chapter tonight, there are actually 29 chapters altogether. So somewhere along the line, we're going to end up with an uneven. Well, no, let's see, 13. No, I guess I always end on an odd chapter. All right, that's fine. We'll just end there. Um, so we're on chapter. We just um, ended chapter 13. So we'll just pick up there with chapter 14 next time. We'll just keep doing 2 at a time. That'll put us finishing the chapter or finishing the book with a full session or not having to do a long session. So anyway, let's just call it there. And it's early enough. I think I'm going to play some Greedfall. So I'll see you all in the next session here in a few minutes.